All right, welcome to part 2 of our embroidery series with our embroidery sampler. If you followed me and were watching part 1, then you would know that at this point we have completed the outline of our back stitching. So that back stitching went around the bottom of our eye, and it also went all around the hand, all the fingernails, and these 2 clouds. Now I went back in and I just darkened up my outline a little bit here with a very light pencil so that it would be a little bit more visible in our videos. But the next stitch that we're going to move on to today, we are going to start with a chain stitch, and then I'm also going to show you how to do the star stitch. Alright, so I've got my embroidery with my back stitching done. My next stitches that I'm going to do are my star stitches and my chain stitch. Now chain stitch is anything that is outlined in blue on the legend, and for our embroidery I am using the cream color. Now my cream is number 739 from DMC Threads, and for my star stitches, those are outlined in purple on my legend, and underneath it says that we are using orange. So that will be this orange here from DMC, and that color number is 741. Now, if you're using different colors, that's totally fine, but if you got the kit for being a Haute Couture member of my Patreon, then you would have these colors in your kit as well. So, I'm going to start with the orange. We're going to do the star stitch in these 3 spots on each side, and then we're going to move on to the chain stitch. Materials that you're going to need today include your embroidery floss, your needle. Again, I'm using a Golden Eye needle from Clover brand. It's a size 9, and I've just held it on the side of my pin cushion over here so that it's right there and I don't lose it. You're also going to need your snips and your cream or light off-white thread or floss for going on to the chain stitch after we do the star stitch. Alright, so we're going to thread up our needle and we're going to start the star stitch in the exact same way that we would have started our first stitches for our back stitch. So I'll remove my packaging there, and I'm taking off a length of floss that is the length of my arm. I'm going to split the thread into 2 lengths, each with 3 strands of thread from the floss, making sure not to get it tangled. You're going to put one of those lengths aside here and just work with the one length that you have in your hand. Now we're going to thread our needle the exact same way as before. I'm going to bring all those strands together, thread them through the eye of the needle, and now we're going to do the same thing that we did last time where we knot the longer tail of our folded over threaded needle. So I'm just going to go ahead and do my knot. Alrighty, so I have my needle threaded, and now I'm ready to start doing my star stitch. So I've already done 2 here, and how I'm going to do it is I'm going to show you how to do your star stitch by doing this 3rd stitch over here. So I have 2 done already, and you can see they're pretty equal in shape, so that's great. And I'll show you how to make yours look pretty even too. So the first step you're going to do is bring your threaded needle up from the back through the center of your star. Now I marked mine with a dot because it was outlined in the yellow chalk and it was really hard to see. So I know that my center is that gray dot from my pencil that I lightly outlined my star with. So first stitch that you're going to do is a stitch away from the dot in any direction, doesn't matter, about a little under 1/4 of an inch away from the dot. And then you're going to sink your needle right in. Now the next stitch you're going to make is you're actually going to come back up through the fabric the same distance that you stitched away from the center of your star, but you're going to come up either from the center or away from the center and go back to the center. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to come up away from the center. I'm going to just use my needle until I see when it's about There, so about the same distance as my first stitch, and then I'm going to sink my needle back into the center. Now the next stitches that you're going to do are going to make a V. So you're going to come up so that your needle is coming up the same distance of your stitch length away from the center, but you're not going straight down. That would make a cross. You want to go just in between where the center would be and your stitch. Now you can either go above or below. I'm going to go just below and just next to where my second stitch was. So bring my needle up there. There's that one. And again, I'm going to bring it back to the center. And then I'm just going to do the exact same on the other side. I'm bringing my needle up, not quite where the center would be if I went straight down, just in between where that first stitch was and where directly down from the center would be. I'm going to bring it up and I'm going to go back in to my center. And now I've got the bottom half of my star done. So then I just repeat those last two steps with those two stitches on the top. So again, bring my needle up from underneath, about halfway between where the center line would be and my first stitch, and bring it back to my center. And again, in between where my second stitch ended and where would be my center line, bringing it up and bringing it back to the center. And those are my 3 star stitches, and you can see they all look pretty much the same. Now a star stitch can have more points. You can add lots more points. You could only have the stitches that would make an actual star, so 1 straight up, 2 pointing out, and 2 pointing angular below. Or it can look more like an asterisk, like these. It's completely up to you. It's a creative decision. These are just following what I have in the pattern. Now, the other thing is that a star stitch just always returns back to the center. So it's really easy to just continue stitching back to the center as you go. And the more points there are, the easier it is to see how long those stitches should be. So I'm going to flip it over and show you how I tie it off. So what I did with my star stitches here is I actually didn't tie off my thread between each new star. I just am going to tie it off on my last star. I just moved my thread over and came up from the center of this one, finished my star, came over to my last one, came up through the middle, did my star, and now I'm back on the back after my last stitch and I'm ready to knot it off. And we're going to knot it off the exact same way as we did our back stitch. I'm going to sink my needle through one of the stitches of my star, not the one that I just came out of though. And I'm going to pull that so that I've got a loop and it's not fully tight here. Then I'm going to put my needle through that loop and I'm going to pull it tight, just like we did when we did our back stitch and we tied it off. Then I'm going to just weave my thread through the stitches of my star, going in and out, until I've maybe gone through about 3 stitches there. And then I'm just going to cut my tail off. And that just kind of anchors my tail in the back, keeps my work looking nice and clean. And now I'm ready to move on to my last 3 star stitches over here. Now the reason that I'm showing you the star stitch before I move on to the center of my eye is because the center of the eye is going to be a woven wheel stitch. Now that woven wheel stitch, or a wheelbarrow stitch, is going to have the foundation of a star stitch. And then we're going to do the weaving. So we've already done it a little bit by burying our tail behind our star stitches in the back over here, but there's a little bit more of a process to it when it comes to doing the eye. So I'm excited to show you that one, but next I'm going to show you how to do the chain stitch. So that chain stitch is going to go there and under here. All right, So I've finished both sides of my star stitches over here, and now I'm ready to move on to my chain stitch. So the chain stitch, I've already threaded up my needle after splitting my embroidery floss. I'm using the cream color from DMC, and I'm going to start doing my chain stitch. Now I've threaded my needle the exact same way as we would have with all of our other stitches so far. I've got my needle, threaded it through, and I haven't knotted it because for this one, we're actually going to knot the two ends of our tail together. And you will notice that with this stitch, you're going to run out of thread a little bit faster while you're working. So you might need a little bit more thread than usual, but you're going to knot it the same way. This time you just have both tail ends together as opposed to a longer and a shorter one. So I'm gonna knot those by doing my little magic loop trick. There is my knot, and I'm going to cut off my tail, keeping it neat. And I'm going to start my chain stitch over here next to where my star stitches are, coming from the bottom of the wrist, going to the top of the eye. So I'm gonna go from here to here. So I'm going to start like I always do. Bring my needle up. And I'm going to take my first stitch. And this can be about as long as your stitch that you were doing in the back stitch. So it can be a little, anywhere between 1/8 and 1/4 of an inch. And we're going to go down. Now, what you want to do, like the back stitch, is you're actually going to come up backwards. You want to come up back here in this kind of area where your first stitch ended. You're coming up before that, but you're staying on the line of your stitching. You're actually coming up through your first stitch, if you can see there. So you're coming up through the threads of your first stitch, and you're pulling up, and then you're going back down as far away as the length of your first stitch from the end of your first stitch. So you've come up through your stitch, and you're continuing to stitch forward, keeping your stitches equal lengths, and pulling through. And then you're continuing to do that again. You're coming back up before the end of your second stitch, coming up in between those threads there, pulling your needle all the way through, and then stitching back into the fabric equidistant away. Now, to give you a close-up view of what that looks like, you're basically forming a chain where your stitches are interlocking with each other. And they kind of look like that. They do this nice little split loop look where it looks like this loop of thread is holding the stitch that's coming out of it. It's very nice. It's a little bit more raised than the back stitch or the star stitch because it's got a little bit more thread going on, so it stands a little higher away from the fabric. But it's nice. It creates a very nice texture. Now you're going to do that stitch from here to here, all the lines above that eye, and you're also going to do it here across the bottom. So I'm going to go all the way across the top, and when I come down to this, I'm going to show you how to do stitching and turning on that point and coming back up. All right. Now, also, if you run out of thread and you're looking to knot it off as you go, you're going to knot it off the same way we always have, where on the back, you'll take your needle, interlock it with one of your stitches from before, do your loop, tie your needle through it to create a little slip knot, and then weave your thread back through your stitches. It's on the back, so if you weave it through other stitches, that's fine too, just as long as they're hidden. And then you'll clip your tail, rethread your needle, and keep going. All right, so I'm going to continue chain stitching, and then I will come back and show you how to do these. I've come to a point where I can turn a corner here and go down into one of my points. So I'm going to show you how I do that here. I'm actually just going to finish off my next stitch by going down into it. And now to do this stitch and turn and come in this direction, I'm actually going to poke my needle up the length of my stitch away from where my last stitch was on my line pointing away from my eye. I'm going to stitch back down into that corner, which is going to bring it back to that point that we're turning. Pull it. And now to continue, I'm going to just come up in the middle of that stitch. So right there. And I'm coming up in my stitch, so in between the threads like I've been doing for my chain stitch all along. But this time I'm going to come up through that stitch and I'm going to go down and continue chain stitching down this point just like I have been before. And so when I go back down into there, that's the beginning of another new chain stitch. So I've turned that corner nice and neatly. So I can go ahead and continue chain stitching. Now I'm going to continue that chain stitch going boop, 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 and I'm going to do all the lines in between. So that's how I'm going to move around the eye, finishing off my chain stitches. Then we come back, I'm going to show you some more stitches, like how we finish off these clouds, these fingernails, the eyelid, these raindrops, and of course the center of the eye. Not all in one video, but in the next video I will show you how to do the satin stitch. All right, so I'll see you in the next video.